let me ask you this, not to put you on the spot, because this is an impossible question, and I acknowledge that going in. I usually ask people, what are their three favorite books? That's cruel and silly. Why would you only pick three when there's an entire universe of literature to enjoy? But what are some favorite books of yours that might be similar to the types of things you'd be interested in seeing?
Yeah, it's very difficult to ask a literary agent that question. I know that, one book that I remember reading as a child that I loved so much was Tuck Everlasting. I remember really feeling like I was reading that at the moment where I still believed in magic, and I still believed that, there could be something that you could drink from that would make you live forever. And I remember, also feeling that way about Alice in Wonderland, and just in terms of it being not even a book that makes much sense, but just a book that, like, where is this book going and why? And trying to, like, piece that together and just sort of be like, what does this mean? And so that was really big for me. And I also have mentioned before in the past Anne Frank's diary, because I was completely obsessed with it as a kid. I think I maybe read it like 10 times. I'm Jewish and have always been a little bit, obsessed with stories from that time period. But I also kept a journal ever since I was very little. And so when I discovered that book, I think I really felt this connection and this sort of idea of how do I put myself in, what would I do if I was Anne Frank, and what would I write about? And so, yeah, those are three to mention, I think.
Oh, with Anne Frank, obviously that's an extremely serious read. But aside from the history, do you know what it is specifically about that voice that spoke to you, that you read it so many times?
Yeah, I think because she was just a normal girl, despite the fact that what was happening in the world was so extraordinary and almost unbelievable. She had created, these moments in her day that were quite normal, aside from the fact that she couldn't leave her house. The way that she, her outlook and her way of being was just, was so compelling because it was so normal and because she was so normal. And when you see a story like that, it only makes you kind of look in awe at all the lives that were affected by something like that, like something as devastating and scary as the Holocaust. And I think, I also think I was probably told about the Holocaust at a very young age and didn't really understand it. And I think, we learned about it in Hebrew school, or we watched videos about it, but it really wasn't until I read Anne Frank's diary that I was like, oh, this is what it would be like if I, who is the age of Anne Frank, and when I discovered the diary, if I was alive during that time, this could have been my story. I, could have known people who didn't make it. So I think it was also maybe the first book I read with a real sad ending. And I think I like to be sad. I think that's probably something I like. So not that I liked that ending or anything, but just that, being moved and kind of being reminded of why it's important to appreciate every day that we're here is one of the reasons I read. So
I love a good sad story. It's partly because of my own emotional issues that I think just come from being raised a Hoosier, Midwestern and stoic. I find it nearly impossible to cry in real life. I was just at a funeral last week. Didn't cry at all, but I came home and I had a sad book. And when it's quiet, nobody's around, and it's a controlled environment, that I can read a sad story, and then that emotion can come out of me. So there's a place for it. So I'm not just walking around with it just bottled up all the time. But in public, forget it. It's never going to happen. Unless it's Avengers Endgame and we're all in the dark theater, and then it's, then it's okay.